The church glittered with chandeliers that burned like judgment, every crystal throwing light upon silk, lace, and the careful cruelty of polite faces. She stood at the altar as though carved from ivory, hands folded, breath shallow, listening to whispers crawl beneath hymns. They spoke of debts, of gratitude, of a girl raised too gently for resistance. Her name drifted from mouth to mouth without mercy. No one asked whether her heart consented. They only waited for obedience, for the soft surrender of a young woman taught that silence was virtue and endurance the highest form of grace itself alone. The groom beside her smelled of starch and certainty, his vows rehearsed like contracts memorized by candlelight. He did not look at her eyes, only at the future promised to him. Land secured, accounts balanced, respectability restored. Her mother's smile trembled with relief rather than joy. Somewhere behind, a cousin laughed softly, already imagining the stories. The priest cleared his throat, expecting submission. Her pulse thundered louder than bells. In that sound lived terror, yes, but also a fragile, dangerous thought. What if she did not comply? The question flared, bright and forbidden, against everything she had been taught before. When the first vow left his mouth, heat rushed her face, then drained, leaving resolve cold and clear. She stepped back. Gasps scattered like dropped pearls. Her father stiffened. The priest faltered. She heard her own voice, steady as winter glass, asking for air. The lie was thin yet sufficient. As attendants turned, she lifted her skirts and moved, not running yet, but walking away from an ending she refused. The doors loomed. Freedom was a rumor, but she chased it anyway. Outside rain waited, night held its breath, and consequence followed, swift and merciless, unnamed, relentless, awake, near, unavoidable. Rain struck her like absolution and accusation combined, plastering curls to her temples as she fled down stone steps. Laughter chased her, then outrage, then the sharp joy of scandal taking its first breath. Coaches rattled, horses snorted. She veered into shadow, lungs burning, shoes slipping. The world narrowed to motion and sound. Behind her, a future shouted demands. Ahead, a street lay waiting, crowded with carriages paused like beasts at water. She chose the darkest shape, marked by a crest whispered to be feared. Its owner named only in rumors, curses and prayers murmured late, fearful, sincere, trembling, tonight. She climbed without thought, skirts snagging, breath breaking, the door closing upon her disgrace. Inside smelled of leather, smoke and something colder, restraint. Darkness wrapped her. The carriage lurched forward. Panic clawed, yet relief followed, treacherous and sweet. Whoever owned this moving shadow would be merciless, they said, a duke forged from iron and silence. She pressed herself small, praying for invisibility. Her life had narrowed to seconds. Each wheel turn carried her farther from vows and nearer to a reckoning she could not imagine. Fate stirred, listening, patient, ancient, amused as breath fogged glass, trembling, alone, unclaimed, waiting, still. The carriage slowed, then stilled. Silence thickened, intimate as a held secret. A lamp flared, unveiling a man opposite her, composed as stone. His eyes, dark and measuring, missed nothing and promised nothing. The feared Duke of Rumor existed now, breathing, human, severe. He regarded her torn glove, her soaked hem, her defiant chin. She braced for rebuke. Instead, he spoke with careful courtesy, asking her name as though it were a gift freely offered, not a possession seized. His voice carried winter's calm law, and an unexpected gentleness that unsettled her, steadied her, frightened her, entirely, wholly, suddenly so. She gave only a fragment of truth, and he accepted it without insistence. Outside, rain resumed its verdict. Inside, space altered. He removed his coat and placed it near her, not touching, not commanding. The gesture felt radical. She realized she was not being hunted, not yet. The Duke's presence was a wall between her and pursuit. Still, danger lingered, sharpened by reputation. She wondered whether monsters were born or made by the stories people needed to survive their fear. Her heart learned a new rhythm, cautious, hopeful, untrained, alive, listening, counting, choosing, waiting, trembling, grateful, uncertain, brave, tonight, alone. He asked where she wished to go. The question landed like mercy. Choice, long denied, stirred her spine. She named no destination, only distance. He nodded, accepting ambiguity as answer. The carriage rolled on. In that moving room, she felt the weight of society recede, replaced by the peril of proximity. Every mile would multiply whispers. Her ruin had begun. Yet something else awakened too, a belief that dignity might survive flight, if guarded by a man who understood restraint as strength. The night seemed to listen, approving, watchful, silent, complicit, patient, vast, enclosing, secretive, enduring, ancient, slow, inevitable, kind. At a crossroads he spoke again, low and deliberate. He warned her of consequences, not to frighten, but to honor truth. Protection would draw fire, scandal would bite. He would not cage her. The promise startled more than threat. She studied his face and saw solitude etched by choice. Fear shifted shape, becoming trust's reluctant cousin. She understood the bargain forming without words. He would shield her body, not command her will, unless she invited him beyond the line. Her breath eased, shoulders lowered, courage steadied, resolve sharpened, eyes lifted, meeting his briefly, bravely, honestly, trembling, warm, resolute, changed forever. The carriage turned toward darkness deeper than streets, toward a future unwritten. He reached to draw the curtain, then paused, allowing her the last look at the world she fled. Bells tolled somewhere, distant and condemning. She did not weep. When the curtain fell, he spoke softly, a vow unbound by law or altar, promising shelter, time, and choice. The feared Duke's carriage bore her onward, and in its shadow, hope learned how to breathe. Between heartbeats, destiny shifted, reputations shattered, silence spoke, and a woman chose survival over surrender, dignity over obedience, tomorrow over yesterday, carried gently, dangerously away. Morning crept into the carriage as a pale concession, light thinning the darkness without forgiving it. She woke to motion softened by distance, the rhythm steady and protective, and realized she had slept without fear. The discovery unsettled her. Sleep implied trust, and trust had been expensive. When she stirred, the Duke had already arranged the world. Curtains drawn just enough for breath, a cup secured against spill, his presence angled away, deliberate in courtesy. He acknowledged her waking with a nod, as if nights spent in flight were ordinary and deserved respect, not remark. They stopped at an inn where no one questioned his authority and everyone measured her with practiced discretion. The Duke spoke briefly, precisely, and rooms appeared, quiet and distant from the yard. He did not escort her through public spaces, nor did he hide her like contraband. Instead, he offered a path between exposure and erasure. In the room, a fire burned low. He set a small parcel on the table and stepped back. Inside lay gloves of soft leather, plain and well made. A token, not a claim. She understood the language. Protection could be visible without being possessive. By noon, rumor reached them as swiftly as weather. A messenger arrived, hat crushed in his hands, voice trained to neutrality. The bride had vanished. The altar had been abandoned. Names were being paired with enthusiasm. The Duke dismissed the man with payment and a warning wrapped in politeness. When the door closed, silence resumed its careful work. She stood by the window watching smoke rise from chimneys, thinking of her mother's relief curdling into panic, her father's pride cracking. The Duke waited. He never asked for apology. Travel resumed toward the countryside, away from the city's sharp appetite. The carriage felt altered now, a vessel acknowledged by daylight. He spoke of practicalities, not plans. Time, he said, could be a shelter if respected. She listened, absorbing the steadiness of his sentences, the way he weighed words before releasing them. She noticed his hands, scarred but clean, resting open upon his knee. He did not reach. Restraint became a presence, reassuring and severe. In its shadow, her own resolve clarified. She would not be hidden forever. They arrived at an estate that wore discretion like a virtue. Stone softened by ivy, windows uncurious, servants efficient and quiet. She was given rooms overlooking a garden winter had not yet surrendered. A maid brought water, bread, and a dress in a muted color that neither celebrated nor diminished her. The Duke did not enter again that day. He sent tea and a note written in a hand disciplined and spare, granting her freedom of the grounds and asking, without pressure, whether she would receive him at dusk. By evening, scandal bloomed. The city sent its verdicts outward like smoke. A pamphlet arrived by mistake, folded wrong, naming her with relish. She read only the first line before folding it closed, pulse racing. The word mistress burned though unspoken. When the Duke came, she placed the pamphlet between them. He read without expression, then folded it with care and fed it to the fire. He did not deny the rumor aloud. Instead, he said evenly that silence could starve some lies and feed others. The choice, he added, would not be hers alone. They walked the garden paths as lamps kindled, distance measured, proper. He spoke of boundaries as promises, not walls. If she wished to leave, he would arrange it. If she wished to stay, he would protect her name as best he could, knowing the cost. His reputation, already ironed into menace, could bear additional weight. He asked nothing in exchange. The offer carried risk precisely because it was clean. She felt the ground tilt. Dignity, she realized, required witnesses willing to stand. At supper, another message arrived, sealed with her family's crest. She did not open it. The Duke noticed and said nothing, passing her the salt, the mundane gesture anchoring her. He ate little. She sensed vigilance beneath his calm, the readiness of a man accustomed to weathering storms for others. When the meal ended, he rose first, as if to grant her precedence even in departure. He paused, then removed a ring from his finger, setting it on the sideboard. Not an heirloom, not ornate. Plain gold, worn thin. He said only that symbols could be shields when truth needed time. That night, she lay awake listening to the house breathe. The ring remained downstairs, waiting. She understood the scandal would sharpen by morning. To stay was to accept the world's misreading. To leave was to surrender to it. The Duke had given her a language of choices and a token that asked nothing. At dawn, bells would count her shame again. As moonlight thinned, she rose, wrapped his coat around her shoulders, and went to claim the ring, knowing that protection, once accepted, would demand courage she had only just begun to find. She descended the stairs with care, every step an argument with habit. In the hall, portraits watched with inherited authority, faces trained to judge deviation as failure. She met their gaze without flinching, practicing a courage that felt borrowed but usable. The ring caught lamplight, modest and resolute. She did not put it on. Instead, she closed her fingers around it, feeling its warmth, imagining the weight of rumor pressing harder. Somewhere beyond the walls, pens scratched, mouths rehearsed cruelty, alliances adjusted. Within, a quiet alliance had formed, wordless and severe, between two people who respected limits because they understood loss. She returned to her room with the ring hidden in her palm, aware that acceptance would soon require a declaration she was not yet ready to speak, and that the Duke, patient as stone, would wait until waiting itself became an act of defiance. The house held its breath with her, knowing morning would demand names, choices, and courage sharpened by consequence. Nothing would remain safely ambiguous anymore. Evening settled over the estate like a held breath, drawing shadows long across the library floor and deepening the hush between shelves. Firelight trembled against leather spines, and rain traced patient lines down the tall windows. She waited there because waiting had become her language, hands folded, spine straight, heart rehearsing restraint. When the Duke entered, he did so without announcement, closing the door gently as though silence itself were fragile. He remained standing, granting distance, granting dignity, his presence steady as a pillar anchoring the room against rumor, consequence, and the restless ache of unspoken truths between them now. He asked if she wished the fire higher, the question ordinary yet weighted with care. She answered no, then surprised herself by speaking further, confessing that warmth frightened her less than expectation. The admission hovered. He listened without interruption, eyes attentive, face carved by discipline rather than hardness. She told him of the altar, the vows that tasted like ash, the moment choice awakened too late to be polite. Shame trembled beneath her voice, but relief threaded through it, fragile and bright. He did not correct her feelings. He received them as one receives a trust without demand or debt. The Duke spoke then, not of her scandal, but of his own solitude, shaped long before gossip found him useful. He described a marriage arranged with equal indifference, a house filled with courtesy and absence, a woman who learned to disappear beside him. Loss had taught him restraint, he said, because possession destroys what reverence might save. His voice never wavered, yet something loosened, a confession offered without theater. She recognized courage in the steadiness and pain refined into principle. For the first time, she saw him not as refuge alone, but as a man standing beside his ghosts quietly. Silence followed, dense but not cruel. Rain sharpened against glass, punctuating the space where their histories overlapped. She rose and crossed to the window, speaking with her back turned, safer that way. She admitted fear of becoming an anecdote, a cautionary whisper traded over teacups. She feared gratitude mistaken for affection, protection mistaken for purchase. Turning, she met his gaze and asked the question she had avoided since the carriage, whether his shelter demanded anything beyond honesty. The words fell cleanly, unadorned, brave in their simplicity, daring him to answer with equal clarity and without concealment between them at last. He answered slowly as if choosing stones for a foundation. He said he would never trade safety for silence, nor kindness for compliance. He would not ask her to wear his name as armor unless she wished it so. His protection, he insisted, was temporary by design, meant to return choice rather than replace it. The certainty in his refusal startled her more than desire might have. In that moment, the feared duke seemed defined not by power, but by limits honored. Relief moved through her, loosening breath, unbinding shoulders, allowing a fragile hope to stand upright within her finally. The shift was subtle yet irrevocable. She sat, and he joined her opposite, the table between them a respectful boundary rather than a barrier. They spoke of ordinary things, deliberately, as if normality were an act of resistance. Tea cooled, fire dimmed. Each shared detail carried weight precisely because it was chosen. When he mentioned the ring, still unworn, she confessed holding it without accepting it, fearing what acceptance would summon. He did not press. Instead, he acknowledged the courage and hesitation, naming patience as another form of fidelity rarely celebrated within a world addicted to haste and spectacle always. Night deepened, and with it, intimacy sharpened by restraint. She realized she was no longer merely sheltered, she was seen. The difference settled warmly and dangerously. He asked one more question, careful and precise, about what she desired beyond escape. She hesitated, then admitted she wanted to remain herself, unowned, unafraid, capable of choosing love without debt. The confession surprised her with its clarity. He inclined his head, honoring the truth as a vow already spoken. In that exchange, something irrevocable formed, not passion yet, but allegiance tempered by respect strong enough to challenge the coming storm together if necessary. When they parted for the night, the space between their doors felt charged, as though the house itself registered the change. She paused inside her room, touching the ring again, sensing its gravity shift. Outside, wind rose, carrying distant bells and nearer voices from the village, restless with speculation. She knew morning would demand answers sharper than whispers. Standing alone, she practiced speaking plainly without apology. The act steadied her. She was not prepared for love, perhaps, but she was prepared for truth. That readiness, she sensed, would soon be tested beyond the shelter of lamplight and borrowed courage entirely. Before sleep claimed her, she understood the turning she had crossed. She was no longer defined solely by flight, nor by the protection extended. Choice had entered the room and refused to leave. Somewhere in the house, the Duke remained awake, she felt certain, measuring consequences, preparing defenses against a society eager to consume them both. Their alliance, unspoken yet firm, would provoke retaliation. She accepted that knowledge with surprising calm. Dignity, she was learning, was not preserved by hiding, but by standing openly where judgment could see you and fail to destroy you even when fear persists quietly inside. At dawn's edge, light crept again, impartial and revealing. She rose with it, decision forming like frost, clear and resolute. The ring rested on the table, waiting for movement. Downstairs, she sensed the Duke's presence, steadfast as ever, ready to accept whatever shape her choice took. Scandal would soon demand a name, a posture, a declaration neither of them could avoid much longer. She closed her fingers around the ring, not yet wearing it but no longer hiding it either. In that pause lived the future's first breath, fragile, dangerous, and entirely her own as footsteps sounded faintly below waiting. At breakfast the house gathered itself for confrontation, silver-aligned, chairs placed with intention. Letters waited beside her plate, seals intact, accusations humming beneath wax. The Duke entered last, greeting her with a look that asked nothing yet offered readiness. She opened the first letter and found command masquerading as concern, the second reproach polished into prayer. She read until the words dulled, then set them aside. The Duke waited. She spoke first, voice steady, saying she would not answer demands made without regard for her will. He inclined his head, as if this were precisely the courage he had been guarding. By midday, visitors arrived unannounced, drawn by rumor and proximity to power. An aunt came armed with civility sharpened into threat, her gaze skimming the room for leverage. The Duke received her with courtesy that cooled the air, seating her where windows revealed the garden rather than secrets. She watched, learning how strength could be quiet. When the aunt spoke of reputation, the Duke replied of responsibility. When she spoke of duty, he answered with consent. The exchange ended without victory, yet the balance shifted. Afterward, the Duke apologized for the intrusion. She surprised them both by thanking him for refusing to apologize for her existence. Afternoon brought summons, formal and unavoidable, requesting the Duke's presence at a gathering meant to clarify matters publicly. He read the card and placed it between them. She understood the trap. Attend and be judged, refuse and confirm guilt. The choice pressed upon them like weather. He said he would go with or without her, and that he would speak truth regardless of consequence. He did not ask her to stand beside him. The restraint burned brighter than any plea. She asked for time, then rose, walking the garden to feel earth under her boots, to measure resolve against fear and discover which would answer. In the garden, winter roses clung to life, stubborn and fragrant. She considered the ring, the name, the noise that would follow either choice. She had fled once. Flight had taught her the cost of silence. Returning inside, she found the Duke waiting, coat in hand. She told him she would attend, not as Shelter's guest, but as herself, prepared to speak if asked and to remain silent if not. He accepted without triumph, offering his arm only after she nodded. The carriage felt different this time, not a hiding place but a threshold. As wheels turned, she steadied her breathing, practicing honesty. The gathering unfolded beneath chandeliers familiar as judgment. Murmurs rose and fell, a tide trained to test resolve. When they entered, space opened reluctantly. Faces catalogued her, searching for markers of disgrace. The Duke greeted hosts with formal ease, positioning her where sight lines demanded acknowledgement. When whispers sharpened, he did not interrupt. He waited for the moment when silence would wound more deeply than speech. It arrived swiftly. A question, framed as concern, asked what claim she held upon his protection. The room leaned in. She felt the old heat threaten her composure, then recede. Before she could speak, the Duke did, voice calm and unadorned. He said she held the same claim any person did upon his conscience when injustice presented itself. He said protection was not ownership, and that rumor did not outrank truth. The declaration carried weight precisely because it denied spectacle. The room stilled. She found her voice then, adding that she accepted shelter freely and would leave freely, owing no debt beyond gratitude. Her words fell like measured steps, steadying her spine. A hush followed, thicker than applause. Judgment paused, recalculating its appetite. The former groom appeared, summoned by curiosity and spite. He spoke of contracts and insulted restraint. The Duke answered with law and with something older, respect. He named consent as the foundation missing from any vow worth honoring. The exchange drew lines no one could pretend not to see. She met her former suitor's gaze and said simply that she would not be traded. The simplicity stripped his arguments bare. Some faces hardened, others softened. The room breathed again. The cost of this clarity was immediate and uncertain, yet she felt taller, as if truth had altered her stature. Afterward, corridors hummed with rearranged loyalties. Outside, night received them coolly. In the carriage, she exhaled a laugh surprised into being. The Duke allowed a small smile, then returned to seriousness, asking whether she regretted standing beside him. She answered that regret belonged to silence, not to speech. He nodded, then reached for the ring, placing it between them again. He said the world would demand a symbol soon, and that he would accept any answer she chose. The honesty of the moment pressed close, intimate and bracing. They arrived home to lamps lit against encroaching dark. At the threshold, she paused, the ring warm in her palm. She understood the next step would echo far beyond tonight, binding them against storms not yet broken. She lifted her eyes to him and said she would wear the ring in public, not as surrender, but as declaration of alliance, until she could speak her future plainly. He held her gaze, astonished and steady, then bowed his head in acceptance. As the door closed behind them, the house seemed to lean forward, aware that a line had been crossed, and that the reckoning would not wait long. Upstairs, she removed her gloves slowly, feeling the tremor arrive after courage had done its work. From the window, she watched clouds shear moonlight into fragments, imagining how tomorrow would sharpen questions into blades. The Duke lingered in the hall, not following, not withdrawing, allowing choice its final shape. She placed the ring upon the table, then upon her finger, testing the promise and the peril together. Outside, hooves sounded, carrying news toward mouths. Inside, she whispered a single vow to herself, steady and irrevocable, knowing dawn would demand more than symbols and that love, once named, would insist upon proof protection. Dawn arrived without ceremony, pale and exacting, touching the estate as though it were a ledger to be balanced. She woke with the ring cool against her skin, its weight unfamiliar yet steadied by resolve. Downstairs, the house stirred, servants moving with practiced quiet, the day assembling itself for consequence. She dressed carefully, choosing restraint over flourish, and descended with a composure earned rather than borrowed. The Duke waited in the hall, coat already fastened, eyes attentive. He said nothing at first, and the silence felt like courtesy rather than pressure. When he finally spoke, it was to ask whether she had slept. She answered honestly, and he accepted the truth without comment, as if truth were sufficient currency. News arrived early, carried by hooves and ink. A notice had been circulated, calling for clarification, for propriety, for order restored. The Duke read it and folded it once, placing it on the table between them. He said the city would accept a spectacle or a principle, but not both. She understood the terms. To end rumor required clarity that would bruise. To protect dignity required a stand that would not flatter. She asked for the truth without adornment. He offered it. If she wished marriage, he would not delay. If she wished time, he would shield her until it could be taken without surrender. He would not bargain her future against convenience. The choice settled into her like breath. They traveled back toward the city under a sky-gathering resolve. In the carriage, silence carried meaning rather than fear. She watched fields give way to stone and felt her past and future converge. The Duke spoke once, reminding her that choice did not require gratitude. She answered that gratitude did not negate choice. The exchange sealed something quiet and fierce. When the carriage stopped before the hall appointed for judgment, she did not hesitate. She placed her hand on his arm, not for balance but declaration, and stepped down into scrutiny. Inside the room held breath. Faces arranged themselves into curiosity, approval, resistance. She felt the old heat of scrutiny and steadied it with memory of flight, of night, of shelter freely given. When called upon, the Duke spoke first, stating plainly that protection had been offered without claim and accepted without debt. He said rumor had mistaken restraint for secrecy and kindness for appetite. His voice did not rise. Authority, she saw, did not require volume. When attention turned to her, she lifted her chin and met it. She spoke with clarity earned through fear. She said she had refused a marriage without consent, that she had fled not from duty but from erasure. She acknowledged shelter without shame and declared that dignity could survive scandal if truth were allowed to stand. She named the Duke as witness rather than savior, as ally rather than owner. The room shifted, some hearts closing, others opening. The former groom attempted interruption, but the Duke raised a hand not to silence but to invite order. Law followed his gesture. A murmur spread, uncertain but changed. The presiding authority asked the question everyone feared and wanted answered. What future did she claim? The room leaned forward. She felt the ring warm beneath her skin and understood its meaning now. She said she would choose marriage freely or not at all, and that she would choose it here now with a man who had proven restraint before desire. She turned to the Duke, meeting his eyes. She said his name and asked whether he would accept a vow offered without coercion, public yet sovereign. He answered without haste. He said he would accept only if her choice remained sovereign, if protection became partnership, if silence never replaced speech. He promised not ownership but fidelity to her will, not rescue but presence. The words were spare and binding. When he offered his hand, it was open, waiting. She placed hers within it, feeling not capture but accord. A sound moved through the room, not applause, not outrage but recognition. Authority nodded, recording what had been spoken as though truth itself had taken a seat. Afterward, the city exhaled into rearranged stories. Some doors closed. Others opened cautiously. In the carriage home, she laughed again, quieter this time, relief threading joy. The Duke squeezed her hand once, then released it, respect intact. He asked whether she wished a long engagement or a swift ceremony. She answered that time had taught her to value deliberation, but courage asked for momentum. They agreed on a path that balanced both, choosing a private vow witnessed by few, followed by patience. At the estate, dusk gathered them. Servants smiled with discretion, the house adapting as houses do. They walked the garden together, no longer measuring distance, yet honoring it. He asked what she feared now. She answered that happiness might be mistaken for compliance. He replied that happiness chosen was defiance enough. They stopped beneath the winter roses, breath visible, future tangible. He did not kneel, he did not perform. He asked simply whether she would walk beside him in daylight and shadow, with voice intact. Night settled calm. Inside, preparations began without urgency. She removed the ring to wash her hands, then replaced it, conscious of choice renewed. The Duke stood nearby, allowing her space, presence steady. She realized the story would continue beyond vows, beyond scandal, into the quiet labor of partnership. That knowledge did not frighten her. It steadied her. As bells rang, marking hours rather than judgment, she felt the past loosen its grip. Before sleep, she stood at the window, city lights distant, and considered how flight had taught her the shape of freedom. Behind her, the Duke paused, asking softly whether she wished solitude. She turned and said she wished company that did not crowd. He smiled, understanding, and withdrew a step. In that measured distance lived the promise of a life neither hidden nor displayed, protected by choice. As the house quieted, she felt to begin. The dawn arrived quietly over the estate, a tentative light brushing the frost that lingered on the garden paths. She rose, feeling the weight of the past days settle into her bones like both chains and wings. The ring gleamed faintly on her finger, its warmth a reminder of choice claimed rather than imposed. She dressed deliberately, selecting fabrics that neither announced nor concealed, and walked toward the drawing room where the Duke waited. His presence was steady, commanding without display, and in that quiet she understood the depth of what had grown between them. Not passion yet, not love declared, but a profound recognition. A shared code of honor, a sanctuary carved from restraint and courage. When she entered, he rose, inclination of the head precise, measured. He did not reach for her hand, did not speak and flourish. He waited. She met his gaze and saw the same steadiness she had learned to trust, the same unwavering consideration of consequences before action. The scandal, the rumors, the suffocating scrutiny of society, none of it had vanished, yet in this room it could not reach them. He gestured to the chair beside the fire. She sat. A moment of silence passed, thick with unspoken words, each heartbeat measured, deliberate, essential. Outside, the wind lifted the garden's frost, rattling the window panes, a distant herald for the events yet to come. The letters had arrived overnight, formal and insistent. They demanded clarity, demanded appearance, demanded that the Duke answer for her presence under his roof. She studied them briefly, recognizing the delicate cruelty of their phrasing, the expectation that she must bow under the weight of collective opinion. The Duke took the papers from her hand, reading with a calm that belied the force of their message. He folded them once, twice, then placed them back on the table. "The world will not bend," he said, voice low and precise, "but we may choose how we stand." There was no condescension, only fact. She felt the gravity of that observation settle in her chest, mingling with the warmth of the fire, steadying and clarifying her resolve. By mid-morning the carriage was ready. The city awaited their arrival with all its gossiping curiosity, all its unrelenting expectation. She took her place beside him, hands clasped in her lap, her posture a careful blend of elegance and purpose. He did not take her hand, did not insist upon proximity, yet in every measured glance he granted, she felt protection and presence entwined. The horses moved steadily, their hooves striking cobblestones in a rhythm that mirrored her pulse. As the carriage drew closer to the appointed hall, she felt the old heat of scrutiny returning, but now it was tempered by the knowledge that she had allies in restraint, in principle, in the unspoken bond forged with the Duke. She was no longer merely fleeing, she was advancing with intent. Upon arrival, the hall's heavy doors opened to reveal a sea of polite faces, arranged to witness judgment, to weigh propriety against rumor, to savor scandal as if it were a delicacy. Whispers rippled like water over stones, eyes catalogued, hands adjusted gloves, collars stiffened. She drew in breath deliberately, recalling nights of flight, hours of shelter, moments where choice had been granted and honored. The Duke led without speaking, presenting her not as property to be displayed, but as a person claiming her space in the world, demanding acknowledgement not favor. Her heart trembled, not from fear alone, but from the potency of standing upright amid expectation and scrutiny. A former suitor, emboldened by rumor, attempted to approach, to speak claims of propriety, to challenge her presence. The Duke's hand lifted, deliberate, commanding not in violence but in authority. Silence fell, dense, and in that moment she recognized the depth of his influence. He demanded attention not by threat, but by the precise application of consequence and the integrity of measured speech. When he spoke, it was only to state truth. She had accepted shelter without obligation, protection without debt, and her choices were her own. The words landed like iron tempered with silk, clear and immutable. The room shifted, recalculating assumptions, adjusting judgments, watching as someone chose dignity over compliance, principle over fear. She stepped forward, speaking her own truth, voice steady, carrying not defiance but clarity. She recounted her flight, the altar abandoned, the vows refused, the fear transformed into deliberate action. She declared that she would not be traded, coerced, or claimed without consent. Her gaze swept the assembly, calm and commanding, finally resting on the Duke. He did not speak, did not move. He stood beside her, silent, unwavering, his posture affirming her words without overshadowing them. The power of their alliance was immediate and undeniable. It existed not in spectacle, but in principle, not in claim, but in the honor of mutual respect. Questions came, measured and pointed. What future did she claim? What allegiance could be recognized without scandal? Her voice answered with precision, stating that she would claim a life of choice, protected by honesty, witnessed by the Duke, aligned not by fear but by agreement. She extended no hand to him for protection, only recognition of their shared principles. He nodded, offering consent rather than direction, presence rather than dominance. The assembly drew in a collective breath, some astonished, some reassessing, all aware that a line had been drawn and that neither coercion nor rumor could easily erase the assertion of selfhood laid bare before them. The former groom attempted again, words sharpened with entitlement and expectation, but the Duke intervened with authority not loud but absolute. He recounted law, principle, and restraint, balancing every syllable to demonstrate the power of honor over appetite. She did not flinch, did not hesitate. She had rehearsed this truth in the quiet of the estate, in the shadows of night, in the weight of every choice she had claimed for herself. The confrontation dissolved under the clarity of her declaration and his steady support. Judgment recoiled from principle, or at least deferred, acknowledging that spectacle could not supplant sovereignty. When the assembly dispersed, the Duke led her back to the carriage. The city's whispers still followed, but the burden had shifted. She felt the ring warm against her finger, not as a talisman, but as a marker of agency, choice recognized and respected. He did not speak and she did not ask. The ride home carried them in quiet, punctuated by the rhythmic strike of hooves, the occasional sigh of wind through trees. In that cadence she sensed a future measured not by scandal or fear, but by deliberate acts of courage, understanding, and mutual respect. She realized for the first time that the life she would lead could be crafted rather than inherited, chosen rather than imposed. At the estate, night embraced them gently. The windows framed pools of moonlight, the frost shimmered faintly across the garden, and the house exhaled into quiet anticipation. They walked together without need for speech, their steps aligned in the unspoken rhythm of trust earned and honored. Beneath the winter roses, the Duke paused and asked what she feared now. She admitted that she feared happiness might be mistaken for obedience, that affection might be misread as surrender. He answered with calm precision, that happiness chosen freely is itself a form of defiance, and that affection given without compulsion carries more weight than any imposed by circumstance. She smiled softly, understanding that restraint had become intimacy, that protection had become partnership, and that choice, finally acknowledged, had transformed fear into opportunity. The wind lifted petals from the roses, scattering them across frost and stone, a visual echo of their trials, fragile yet enduring. Inside, she placed the ring upon her finger deliberately, testing the weight, the warmth, the significance of a bond freely embraced rather than forced. The Duke stood nearby, giving space yet presence, offering neither command nor apology, but companionship as principle realized. As the night deepened, they lingered in the drawing room, quiet as history itself, listening to the house breathe around them. She realized the narrative of her life had shifted irrevocably. She had fled, been protected, confronted, declared, and now existed in a space where autonomy and alliance intertwined. Every whisper from the past, every accusation, every assumption of weakness, had been met with courage and principle. She felt the pulse of consequence still lingering, society poised for speculation, but she no longer trembled. Strength had become tangible, realized not in spectacle but in choices claimed, in dignity preserved, in the recognition that her voice mattered and her consent was sacred. In the final hours of the night, she stood at the window once more, moonlight sketching her shadow across the floor. The Duke remained nearby, silent, steady, a presence that asked nothing yet promised constancy. She clasped her hands together and whispered to herself, a vow neither ceremonial nor observed, that she would navigate the world by her own will, protected by truth, guided by principle, and accompanied by a man who understood restraint as the truest form of devotion. Outside, the estate slept, the city whispered, and the future waited, fragile, dangerous, and entirely theirs, carrying the promise of freedom tempered by courage, and a love forged not by possession but by choice. The wind shifted, carrying with it a distant sound of hooves, a reminder that the world beyond the estate remained, ever expectant, ever observing. She turned, meeting his eyes, and for the first time allowed herself a full measure of trust. The Duke inclined his head, understanding the gravity of the unspoken, that their trials were not concluded, that society would demand reckoning, that love, once named, required action. In that pause, charged with consequence and possibility, the air seemed to still, and the softest hint of dawn glimmered at the horizon, promising both challenge and sanctuary in equal measure, as the first true choice of their shared future lay quietly, waiting to be claimed.